Thanks for clicking. China's role in the Russian invasion of Ukraine continued to dominate headlines this week. With Russia's armies bogged down and its economy about to collapse, the US reported that Russia had asked China to intervene in the conflict and possibly provide economic and military aid. For its part, Russia immediately denied these allegations, followed quickly by China.
I didn't do anything wrong.
We also saw stocks for China's main real estate developers fall to their lowest point since 2008 this week, as investors grew increasingly worried about their ability to pay their debts. This comes ahead of the March 31st deadline, where Chinese real estate developers are required by law to have their auditor reports filed, and it's widely expected that will uncover the true state, the true nature, of the debt held by these real estate developers, of which there have been multiple defaults throughout the year. So what I want to do this week is skip over Evergrande.
Oh, good sign.
And instead take a closer look into China's current and potential role in the Ukrainian crisis. And then I want to briefly go over the developments in China's real estate crisis as developments continue to get worse. We will continue to go over China's role in the Ukrainian crisis during our Friday updates, as it's looking more and more like this crisis in Ukraine will have a big impact on China's economy. Good or bad, this crisis is likely to affect China's economy for the foreseeable future, and we'll make sure we have those updates out every Friday. Click like and subscribe if you want to get those updates, but for now, let's get into Ukraine. As mentioned, the United States reported that Russia had asked China for economic and military aid in its current quagmire in Ukraine.
They suspect that Moscow has requested arms or some sort of weapons or military equipment from Beijing.
Russia immediately denied the allegations, as did China. So who is lying, and will China help? Well, it's unlikely that the US is lying, as there is very little to gain for spreading this rumor. It is always possible that the US is spreading a disinformation campaign. This could be meant to sort of rattle the sabers of both Russia and China, to sort of throw something into the mix to throw them off guard. It's also very possible, or at least a little possible, that the US is poking fun of Russia and China. The US knows all too well the perils of entering into an invasion that you thought would be easy and then getting stuck, as it turns out that occupying and invading a country is much more difficult than you once thought. Also remember that Russia helped Iran help fund the Iraqi insurgents throughout the US occupation of Iraq, so it is somewhat possible that the US is just poking fun just a little bit. With that said, let's say that the US report is true and that Russia did ask China for military and economic aid. Given that Russia is completely bogged down in Ukraine, that they don't seem to be able to take the country as quickly as they thought they could, and that their economy is on the verge of collapse, it is highly likely that they would turn to China for help. It's also likely that they would completely deny that they were unable to handle this invasion themselves.
Everything's cool right now. Might be some problems later, but
China, on the other hand, is not going to admit publicly that their new friend cannot handle the invasion that China themselves greenlit. Remember, China knew about this invasion at least as early as the Olympics, and Chinese President Xi Jingping only asked Russia that they wait until after the Olympics to commence the invasion. Also, China is not going to admit that they're helping Russia economically when they obviously have their own problems at home. With that said, let's say that China was asked to help economically and militarily in the invasion of Ukraine, as Russia does seem to be having some problems. Chinese foreign minister was asked about this on Monday and said that he doesn't want the sanctions imposed on Russia to affect China. So publicly, China has said that they are not going to help Russia, as they are fearful of retribution from the United States. With that said, the US has said that they are fearful that China has already decided to help Russia. So, with all this back and forth, maybe it's a little confusing. China and Russia both deny that Russia even asked China to help. China has said they are not going to help. The US thinks that China might help. So, let's say that China does decide to help Russia in Ukraine. They are likely to do so very quietly, as they don't want any A, retribution from the US, or B, they don't want any domestic problems at home, as China definitely has its own economic problems, which we're about to get to. Though the US isn't the superpower that it once was, able to wield its power unfettered throughout the globe, what they've done collectively, along with their European allies, shows that they do still wield a great deal of power. So, China is not going to very publicly help Russia economically. As we mentioned a few weeks ago, they might buy up Russian oil, Russian commodities, Russian wheat. They might buy from Russia, but in terms of aid coming from China, given their domestic problems and given their international problems vis-a-vis the United States, I don't see China getting involved, at least publicly, at least to a large extent. With China having its own problems with its real estate crisis, which we'll talk about in a minute, with new COVID lockdowns affecting the entire economy, and with Morgan Stanley predicting that we shouldn't see any GDP growth out of China this quarter, not just 1 or 2 or 3%, which would have made headlines, but 0% growth throughout the quarter, China is definitely not in a position to start saber-rattling with the United States. They are not in a position, whether or not they could take them or not, they are not in a position to try to face sanctions from the US. So they're not going to publicly get involved in this crisis.
He's in no position to go into the unknown not known.
So yeah, China is definitely in a tough spot. Well, they've said that they have a limitless partnership with Russia.
Vladimir Putin and Xi Jingping have a no-limits relationship.
They also don't want to risk retribution from the United States, so they're going to tread carefully going forward. On to China's economy, which, as we've said, is one of the main limiting factors to China getting involved in this crisis. We did actually receive some good news on China's economy that the loose monetary policy might be having some good effects with shopping, eating out, and investment, though investment from state-backed companies, still investment was up throughout the country last month. With that said, as we mentioned, stocks in China's real estate developers were down almost 10% last week, 9.7%, seeing the worst rout of their stock prices since 2008. We also received news that sale price of Chinese real estate was down again last month, down 0.13%, which was down even further than the 0.04% that they were down in January. So, despite China's loose monetary policy, despite them lowering rates in previous weeks, we still don't see the Chinese real estate buyers coming back to the table. It's not even that Chinese real estate is stagnant. It's not that it's experiencing minimal growth. It's actually retreating a little bit. House prices are going down, and the pace of which house prices are going down is accelerating. So, not a great sign for the turnaround of Chinese real estate developers, and that's not expected to get any better anytime soon. As we mentioned, the Chinese real estate developers have a report due by the end of March, which is likely to show that there was a lot of hidden debts throughout the books. We mentioned last week that there have been multiple auditor resignations from these Chinese developers over basic accounting principles. So, given what we've seen in the past, it's more likely than not that these developers had hidden debt off the books, that they had debts that were not reported. And if the report comes to show that these Chinese developers are in more trouble than we thought, expect even more money to flow out of China and expect it to get even more expensive for Chinese real estate developers to borrow funds at a time when it's already extremely expensive for them to access international capital. International investment has all but dried up, and going back to with what we said before, were China to help with the Russian invasion, that international capital would likely dry up even further, which China really can't afford right now. So all in all, while the Russian invasion of Ukraine is dominating the news right now, there's a clear link between China's stance on that crisis and its own economic policies, the economic problems that they're facing at home. As China continues to deal with its real estate crisis, which hasn't showed any concrete signs of getting better over the past few months. In fact, every week we see more and more straws on that camel's back. We see bigger debts, we see hidden debts, we see lower home prices. There's no signs of this crisis turning around. With China having to deal with that crisis, it's going to be very reluctant to add on an international crisis of the scale that would be involved that would occur if the US got involved. They're going to be very hesitant to add that on to their own current problems, not to mention the COVID lockdowns that are currently underway in China, which we haven't even talked about. So, I would say expect China to either distance itself from Russia going forward. Like we said, it will buy their oil, it will buy their wheat, it will want those commodities as a discount. But I wouldn't expect them to, at least publicly on a grand scale, intervene in this crisis to help Russia occupy Ukraine. When China greenlit this invasion, when China gave the okay to Russia, it was expected, as most of the world expected, that this was going to be a very quick endeavor for Russia, that this wasn't going to turn into what it has turned into. And I think China is probably feeling a little bit burned by Russia on this, that its limitless partnership maybe isn't as strong as it thought it was. Its limitless partner doesn't have the power that maybe they said they did. So I wouldn't look to China to throw its hands all in with Russia in this crisis, but we'll definitely see going forward. And we'll have updates on this channel every week on Fridays to see how China's involvement in Ukraine is affected and is affecting its own economy, its own real estate crisis, its own COVID crisis right now. If you want to get those updates, make sure you click like and subscribe, and thanks so much for watching.